Now, let's turn our attention to America and the news that Hunter Biden, the president's troublesome son, has accepted, or at least he and his legal team have accepted, a plea bargain that will mean he is charged on two counts of a federal tax offence and one on a gun misdemeanor. These are relatively light charges, say a lot of Republicans, compared to what he could be charged with. I'm joined now by Charles Lipson, who is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago and a much-loved Spectator contributor. Charles, can we start with the legal side of this? What does this mean for Hunter Biden?
Well, it means he escapes with a slap on the wrist. The charges that they seem to have agreed to are light ones, and it's not clear. It's clear that he will not serve any jail time. He'll be on probation if the judge accepts the plea deal. The final decision is always up to the judge, and we don't know who the judge is, but it's likely that this will be accepted, although there's a possibility there could be a short jail time. It's also worth noting that Hunter's parents have backed him, and that President Biden has said that he did not interfere in any way, which is not quite true, because he made public statements that he not only supported his son, which any decent parent would do, but that his son had done no wrong, and therefore, as the head of the executive branch and all of the judicial functions, the prosecutorial functions within it, he was sending a clear message. Whether that had any effect, we don't know, but it is not true that he did nothing. It's also worth noting that the real issue is not whether, given these charges, he should serve time in jail. It would be perfectly appropriate for a first-time offender with these relatively light charges to not spend time in jail, although it would also be appropriate if he did spend some time in jail. The real issues are whether he could have been charged with something much more serious, and whether or not, in order to get this plea deal, he was required to proffer before the grand jury and the people prosecuting him. And a proffer would be a complete statement of what he had actually done. And, for example, he was not charged with being a foreign agent, which he could have easily been charged with, and Paul Manafort was charged with and spent time in jail for. So, and that was the basic grift, the scam that they were running. It wasn't really a scam. They were trading off of his name with foreign entities to get leverage within the United States government. Whether that's a crime or not, it depends on a lot of things, but it's pretty clear he was acting as foreign agent, and they didn't charge him with that. And it's not clear he proffered anything. He told the grand jury or told the prosecutors anything.
And there is a separate but connected investigation going on by the House Oversight Committee, which is run by Republicans because they have a majority in the House, into Hunter Biden's business dealings. This has no relationship, this criminal proceeding has no relationship with that House Oversight Committee, does it?
No formal relationship, but obviously a political relationship. Viewers outside of the United States should know that because the Republicans control the House of Representatives, they can send subpoenas. That doesn't mean that the subpoenas have to be complied with if they come before the government, because if they're not complied with, the House of Representatives would send that matter over to the Department of Justice, which is controlled by Joe Biden, and they would be unlikely to prosecute. But you can still subpoena witnesses in the House. In the Senate, it would require the approval of the majority party, which is the Democrats. They only control a very slight majority, just as the Republicans do in the House. But they will not approve any subpoenas to look into the Bidens at this point. Now, it may be the case that if Joe Biden's popularity is so low and the Democrats decide they just have to jettison him, that they would turn on him, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, and the House Oversight Committee, led, as I said, by Republicans, has made it very clear that they are not going to be put off by this sweetheart plea deal, I think James Comey called it. And they will pursue some quite intriguing details that they have unearthed, namely a sort of bank wire transfer from a Chinese entity to an associate of the Biden family, 3 months, I think it was, after Joe Biden resigned as vice president in 2017. And they will follow the money and see where that money went. Do you think the Biden family, the Biden administration are, despite their appearances, Joe Biden says it's all malarkey publicly, do you think they are deeply concerned about this?
They should be. The House is uncovering a lot of information that there was a family-wide effort to monetize Joe Biden's position. The Democrats' position on this is that if Joe Biden cannot be directly connected to any of that, then it's just a matter of family members trading off of his name, which is not illegal. I would draw a distinction here between, there are two distinctions. One is something can be deeply corrupt and not necessarily illegal. And whether that has an implication for the body politic is up to what voters think. And that brings us to the second point, which is the country is so deeply divided. If you look at and divided along ideological terms, Britain has been divided along ideological terms for many decades because Labour and Tory are really ideologically opposed to each other in a way that was not true for a long time between Democrats and Republicans in America. Democrats were more liberal, Republicans were more conservative, but the ideological differences have become much deeper. And if you show me an opinion piece that says that this is an appropriate treatment of Hunter Biden and everything is fair and hunky-dory, I can tell you that was written by a Democrat. If you tell me that it was soft treatment and other people don't get this kind of treatment, that was written by a Republican. Now, that difference no longer applies to Donald Trump. And that's a whole separate issue. We haven't talked about Trump, but I would say that there are a lot of Republicans that are splitting off from Trump. It's begun with the intellectual classes, the people who write op-eds and so forth, who are deeply disturbed, some deeply disturbed by Trump's behavior, some by the fact that he might not be elected, others by the fact that he might be. And so he's a figure like a Boris Johnson who divides people within his own party.
Well, a lot of Trump people and Trump himself are crying foul. They're talking about double standards, as I suppose you'd imagine they would. And of course, there is a difference between Hunter Biden, who is President's son, and Donald Trump, who is seeking re-election. He's seeking the Oval Office again. Nonetheless, you can see why, I think even from trying to be as objective as possible, you can see why Trump supporters will look at the legal persecution of Donald Trump, and I think it's fair to say it's a persecution because it's happening on so many fronts, and say he could be in jail for the rest of his life for holding on to documents. And yet the president's son has done far more criminal things, it seems, and is going to get away without any jail time.
That's right. But it's also against the background of Hillary Clinton getting off. All of the top people in the FBI under James Comey, uh, the the name Comer, who is who is the head of the oversight committee, is so easy to mix up. But James Comey was the head of the FBI, and he was not punished. His top aides were not punished. It's very clear that they misled the Pfizer courts, which are the courts that give these secret warrants. They investigated um, Trump for a Russian collusion that not only was a hoax, but that they should have known was a hoax. They began investigations, according to the person who investigated all of this, John Durham, who is testifying before Congress now. They began all of this without really an adequate pretext. They clearly went after Trump, and they clearly gave excuses to people like Hillary Clinton. The head of the FBI, Comey, wrote her exoneration before she had been interviewed. Um, and she had all of these documents on a home server. Um, why was she excused? Partly because she was a Democrat, say the Republicans, but also because President Obama had communicated with her on that home server, and he would have been called as a witness. Her legal team undoubtedly threatened at any court proceeding. So she got off. And so for Republicans, it begins to look like all of this is two standards of justice. And for ordinary Americans, it looks like if you're connected in Washington, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're part of the establishment, you get different treatment than if you're an outsider. And so it's partly party divisions, but it's also insider outsider. It's worth remembering that Trump ran as an outsider. Indeed, as a former president, he's running as an outsider. I'm coming after the Washington establishment, is what he's saying. And a lot of Republicans love that. They think that the Washington establishment doesn't speak for them. And that's been increasingly true as they are governed. We Americans are governed more and more by bureaucracies who make the rules that are effectively the laws that govern us. So it's a big problem. And I would say there's been a general erosion in trust in all governmental institutions, and the Department of Justice is now in the forefront of that. People don't trust the FBI in the way that they used to, and they don't trust the fairness of the Department of Justice. And whenever a court rules a decision, the courts are a separate branch in America, but whenever the courts make a ruling, one of the first things that you see in any publication is who appointed these judges. Was it a Republican or was it a Democrat? Well, that's important information because it can tell you how the decision was rendered, but it's also very corrosive to to an idea that we have fair and impartial blind justice.
A lot of the Republicans on this House committee, or Republicans in the party and Trump supporters, are very keen to connect Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's shady business activities. I think it's fair to say there's little hints. There might have been something there, but there's no smoking gun. There's no damning evidence as yet. If no smoking gun or damning evidence emerges, do you think this story really hurts Biden at all? Or does it actually flip for him and it becomes gleeful Republicans gloating about this unfortunate story of an errant son? And Biden emerges looking like a loving father. All his texts to Hunter Biden seem to be very supportive. He repeatedly says, "I love you, son." There's obviously a lot of tragedy in the Biden family. Beau, Hunter's brother, died of brain cancer. Joe Biden lost his wife and child in a car crash when the two boys were small. They were both in that car crash. That tragic story is an important part of Biden's political story. I wonder if it ends up helping him if they can't find any evidence linking him to the dodgy activities of Hunter Biden.
Well, it always helps to be seen as a loving father. And the fact that your son has gone through enormous troubles is something many Americans can identify with. Many people all around the world can identify with. Uh, but if this goes beyond uh, Hunter and includes other members of the family, for example, his brother James, the grandchildren got payments. We have no indication that any of them provided any services other than opening doors for people. I think that the corruption is a kind of cloud hanging over Biden. There's an irony here. Biden may be one of the weakest candidates that the Democrats can put forward. And the irony is that Trump is probably the weakest candidate the Republicans can put forward. So the attacks by the other party, in a way, may put a stronger candidate into the lead. It's hard to know. Biden's the real problem. Nobody can run against Biden from the inside of the party, that is a governor or something like that. But it's striking that a real outsider with a lot of kooky views, the son of the former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of President Kennedy, has gotten up into the 30% range, which is not an indication of how much people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in my opinion. It's an indication of how much they dislike Joe Biden as the candidate. And, uh, and, and yet Biden says he's going to run, and he's running as he did as last time, what's called a basement candidacy. He's not getting out. He's not answering questions because every time he speaks off the cuff, he makes blunders, sometimes quite serious ones. And every time he's seen in public, his increasing frailty becomes a problem. And this is a problem for the Democrats generally because they have two members of the Senate who look to be physically and mentally incapable of performing their jobs. And that gives them the majority. They wouldn't, without those two, they wouldn't have the majority. Now in both cases, there are Democratic governors of those two states who could appoint their successors. But but it's a problem that the Democratic Party's leadership looks increasingly like Andropov and Brezhnev in their final years, where they were sort of held up by other people to do what they're doing.
Well, Charles, I could listen to you talking about Hunter Biden all day, but I think we must end it there, sadly. Thank you very much for coming on to Spectator TV.